All right, let's get started editing these photos. I actually recorded these a bunch and didn't have the microphone plugged in. So here we go, round two. Oh, fun times, guys. Okay, so here we got this beautiful Veery. The goal with this one is to make this bird stand out a little bit more. So with these smaller in frame habitat shots, it's definitely challenging and important in the edit to make that bird stand out. So a couple of things wrong here. The log is too bright with the overhead light there. The bird is a little too dark because the light is overhead and slightly behind it. So I'm just going to light up the front of him a little bit more. And then I'll probably just take the background down a little bit darker, a little less contrast in the background, just to de-emphasize it a little bit, and then lose a little bit of the foreground there. So those are the goals with this, so let's get started. We're going to just go ahead and crop in a little bit. I definitely don't want to lose that tree on the left, so we'll come in tight there, and maybe a little bit off of this right side there. And again, I don't want to lose that either, that branch. So something like that looks pretty good. You know what? I'm going to come in just a little bit more, just to lose that one dark branch at the bottom there that was going horizontal. So there we go. It's a good crop. We haven't lost some of the foreground here that sort of obscures where this log is going down into, and that's kind of important to me. So the other thing that's going to happen, you're going to see it consistently with a lot of these photos with all this green, and I see it all the time with my students, is the auto white balance throws this stuff way magenta. And you can see, look at all this pink in this log. You can actually see a lot of the bluish pink in the bird there. None of that belongs there. So the first step is to just ditch a lot of that magenta. So we do that, and look at that. A nice gray log now. No more pink tones in there. There's a little bit of blue left in the bird, so let's warm it up just a tiny bit. Except for the fact that this was taken really early in the morning, and I kind of want to lean into that dusky vibe. So I'm actually going to go the other way. I'm going to go cool that background off just a little bit there, something like that. And it's a little too blue on these tree trunks and in the bird there, so we'll come down to the HSL section here, and I'll just desaturate some of the blue. So there, now I have that cooler tone overall, but not really kind of neon blues happening in the tree there, which is important. So I do want the bird to be warmer. The bird is way too blue now, but I'll do that selectively. And let's get working on the background first. So we'll do a background select here in our masking, and let's check it out. It did pretty good, but watch this. It actually grabbed a bunch of the bird there. So watch, I'll subtract an object select, and then look, I'll just go ahead and highlight that bird, and that should do the trick there. Okay, so what I want to do is actually negative dehaze that background. So I'm going to fade it out a little bit more, make it less contrasty, but that made it lighter. So then I'll just darken the exposure on it a little bit. And I got to say, I'm going to go just a tad cooler with it to give it that real kind of cool, dusky vibe back there. So there we go. So look at that difference before, after back there. Now, it did lose some color. So watch, I'm going to bump the saturation back up to get those greens popping again. And then we'll go, I guess we have to do it globally because in the mask here you can't do the HSL, but here we go. We'll go down here and desaturate those blues even more. So there we go. Now I'm looking good. We've gone from there to there. It sort of fades that background. The color gets a little weaker. The contrast gets a little weaker. And that should allow us to hopefully make this bird stand out more. All right, let's do a subject select. I'm hoping it's going to grab the entirety of the log there as well as the bird, and it did. All right, so I don't want to include the bird in this one, so I'm just going to subtract with a brush. We'll just do a bigger brush here, low feather, 100%, and we're just going to paint out. In fact, we can paint out like the dark part of the log there as well. So now we just have that bottom portion, and look, we're just going to drop the exposure. And more importantly, we'll drop the highlights a bunch, and we'll drop the whites a bunch to sort of fade it, okay? Now, the lighting is and was overhead there, so let's actually fade it a little bit more. Let's just do a linear off the top here, and then we'll just kind of drop it and fade like that. So there we go. Now the top of the log is getting hit with the light, and then it sort of mellows it out down there, okay? We're going to do one more subject select just to grab everything there. And for this one, including the log, I'm going to warm it up a little bit so we can get the bird and the log to just be a little bit warmer toned. I'm going to give it a little bit of a saturation boost. And there we go. And especially because that selection sort of fades its way down, that's fine. I just wanted the upper portion of that to be a little bit warmer. In here's a little bit much, so let's subtract with a radial. Watch this. And we'll just kind of fade that radial into that section to make it slightly less brown underneath there. And then lastly, let's grab this bird. So one more object select here, and we're just going to grab the bird. I didn't really need his legs there, but it grabbed them anyway. So this is where we're going to make this bird stand out. We're going to lighten the exposure a lot, shadows up so we can see more in that face there, and then we're going to drop the blacks for the contrast. A little bit warmer, 1 or 2 points, and then a little bit of saturation should do the trick. Now, remember I said the actual lighting is overhead there. When I lit it like this, especially if I zoom out, look, the whole bird's just lit. It looks kind of weird. It doesn't fit in with the heavy shadow underneath of him there. So we need to give that lighting a match to what's actually happening there. So that's the one thing I'm always fine with doing in my edits. I'm fine with editing to sort of go with the actual lighting that was there. What I've seen a trend with is like a lot of people have started just doing this, like they'll just put like a big radial gradient up here and then darken it, burn it down here, and they make like this, they make it look like there's lighting that was like coming in from the right that didn't actually exist there, you know? And to me, that feels a little false. Now, listen, this is just a personal preference of mine, right? But I do like to edit things to try and remain as close to reality as possible. And of course, I am, like right now, I'm pushing this bird brighter and making it lighter than it was. So I am changing it, but I feel like I'm at least sticking within the realm of what was happening there. And so what was happening there is the lighting was coming in from overhead. So if I subtract a linear off the bottom of this bird, watch that. See, look, I just fade that gradient. So now the lighting, or the lightness, watch, when I turn that on and off. See how it just mostly affects the top half of that bird and not the underside of it, you know? So it looks like that lighting is continuing to come in from overhead there. So there we go. We went from there to there. Nice color shift. I really like the color shift. I think that helped out a lot. And we're going to do the rest in Photoshop. So let's hop on into there. And there's not much to do here. I'm just going to do a couple of minor removals or minimizations of things. So click that new blank layer. And we'll grab our clone stamp tool right over there. All right, so this little, whoops, zoomed in too much there. This little white splotch right there, I'm just going to sample there, light, low opacity, just paint over it. Don't have to get rid of it, just wanted to lighten it. Same thing with these twigs down here, just kind of soften them up. I'm just sampling from up overhead here and just putting in a little bit of that texture over top of it. It's really easy and you don't have to be exact because I was already shooting through some foreground stuff, right? So that sort of helped to keep it, some stuff blurred in front of it, basically, you know? And then I think the only thing left I have to do here is I'm going to zoom in. Now look, that mask did some weird stuff around these edges here, so I'm just going to try and fix those up. I'm just using the clone stamp tool, real tiny brush here. See, it was just that, oops, that last one was not very good there. It's just something to do with the selection. It just kind of lightened up this weird pattern along the edge there. And then a little bit under there, and a little bit right up there. So there we go. Listen, I'm zoomed in way too far too, so it's not going to be that big a deal. Okay, curves adjustment layer. We're going to brighten it up. Keep the blacks down for contrast there. Invert that mask, Command I. We're going to grab the paintbrush, make sure white is our foreground color, and a lower opacity, and we're just going to paint in right on the head there. All I want to do is get the head, the bill, just a little bit lighter. It's probably a bit too much on the bill there. So I'm switching back to black by just hitting X on the keyboard. So black is now my foreground color, and I'll paint that out. I'm going to toggle that on and off. There we go. Subtle, nice change there. And then I think we can just do a little bit of burn across the bottom, right? Because again, I was mentioning that lighting is coming in from overhead. So curves adjustment layer, just darken it. Invert that mask, big soft brush, low opacity. And then we just paint in right there. I think we're done. Before, after. Very subtle change there. Let's go ahead and save this. We'll get back into Photoshop and reset the original so we can see the total before and after. And that's where I can also determine, have I gone too far, you know? And listen, like those things I was talking about earlier with, you know, adding the fake gradients in and changing the lighting like that. Listen, if you like it and it's fine with you, then go for it. It's just a personal opinion of mine. And a personal kind of, it's basically a personal rule of mine that I just don't like to completely alter the lighting that was there. For me, the challenge in wildlife photography is trying to get something cool in the camera. That's where it is. Like, to completely change and alter the lighting here in post isn't that much of a challenge for me. I don't find it a difficult thing to do. but that's because I'm really good at Photoshop. I've been doing it for 20 years. But for me, the challenge of getting that shot to look amazing in camera, or at least have all the pieces in camera that I can just tweak it up a little bit, is definitely the challenge. So there we go. Original image on the right, final image on the left. The bird stands out way more, but he's not like crazy false. So the biggest change there is the color shift, but that's good. You know, like this color was completely wrong due to auto white balance. And I can tell you, it looked a little bit more like this. Like these were the cool cyan greens that were in that forest that morning, that time of day at, you know, what I shoot this at 30th of a second, you know, it was dark in there. So there we go. That's our first final image. Let's do the same thing to the next one. All right, next up. I'm not sure if I like this one more than the other one, but I do really like that I get the foreground in play there. I think that just kind of changes the scene up, but this perch was so great for this bird. And it was very important, as you saw when I was shooting, to frame it in between these tree trunks in the background, because if either one of those was intersecting the bird, the shot's kind of ruined. All right, so same thing is wrong here. White balance is wacky. All that magenta. So we just shift the tint towards the green there, clean it up, get rid of all that magenta. Basically, you're just looking to make sure there's no weird pink tones in the bird and in the log there. So look how pink that is, especially up in here and all in here. And then after, cleans that right up. All right, so we're going to do that cool tone thing again. Let's kind of cool that off to about there. This background, I don't really think it needs that negative dehaze. The horizontal shot, I think I moved, maybe got a little bit closer, so the background's just slightly more out of focus. And incorporating the foreground over here helps to disguise and hide a lot of the other stuff that's in focus on the left-hand side there, so not a big deal. I do want to crop this one little white smudge out of the bottom there, so we'll just do that, and we'll actually leave it offset right there, I guess. I do like a little bit of that tree coming in. The whole point is to show off this forest. It does feel a little crooked though, huh? Let's straighten that out. There we go. Cool. Okay, so next up, let's do a subject select and hope that it grabs the tree trunk and all that. Yes, it did. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to go darker with it. Drop those highlights, drop the whites a little bit, and we are going to warm it up a little. And with that warmth came a little magenta, so we'll go towards the green side with the tint there. But there we go. Now we have that log much more managed. Remember, the lighting was coming in from overhead, so subtract a linear gradient. Let me walk through that again. I just kind of did that a little quick there. So we want to just do a subtract with a linear, and then we're just going to drag that in off the top there. So that top looks like it's actually getting the lighting overhead, which is what it was doing. See, original. I'm just trying to tone down the rest of that overhead lighting. It was like seriously overhead lit, you know, which is fun. You get those overhead spotlights sometimes. And it's funny, if the bird like tilts his head just right, you get all the light on this side of the bird's head and it looks incredible. But alas, he did not do that. I'm still seeing some of these pink tones in here globally, so I'm just going to shift it towards the green just a little bit more. There we go. That's better. Plus, look, it makes everything much more green. Like, look how bad that white balance was originally. So pink. And now we have a nice green look to it. Looks pretty good. Maybe I went a tad too far, so we'll back off it just a little bit. And then let's do a subject select, or no, an object select actually. We'll do subject is going to grab everything. Object should grab just the bird for me. And we're just going to go ahead and lighten him up, punch him up a bunch, lift those shadows to get those browns a little bit nicer, drop the blacks to maintain contrast, warm it up a bit, give it a boost of saturation there, and now that bird is standing out. Same thing as before, we got to subtract a linear and drop that off the bottom so the lighting looks like it's coming in from overhead as it was. There we go. That bird is standing out nicely. Into Photoshop we go. Just a couple of minor tweaks to do in there. And then I think we'll be done with that image. It's a pretty straightforward edit. So let's start with a new blank layer. There's just this weird patch of like open gray up there. So I'm just going to sample. I am using the clone tool. Very low opacity there. I know you see 100% opacity when I'm doing it, but I'm using a graphics tablet that's allowing me to push lightly and get a really light opacity. So I would suggest 20 to 30% opacity, and then we're just going to kind of fade out that white spot over there. Everything else looks pretty good. Yeah, excellent. All right, and we'll do the same thing we did on the previous image. We're going to add a curves adjustment layer, punch it up quite a bit, drop those blacks to maintain contrast, invert that mask, Command-I or Control-I on Windows, grab our paintbrush, make sure we're on white, small brush, hardness of 0, And then light opacity, we're just going to paint in gently around the head here. Yes, I know it's not sharp and it's grainy as hell, but I'm zoomed in way too far right now. So when I zoom back out to like 100%, there you go. It's looking good. Nice and sharp. So there we go. That just gave me that little bit of punch right up in there. And I don't know, maybe let me try a little bit of burning. Another curves adjustment layer. We'll drop it like that. Invert that mask. Maybe just a little bit back there. A little bit underneath of here. Remember that overhead lighting situation, right? We're just darkening the bottom there. And then just trying to keep that general, this area where the bird is lighter. So we went from there, there to there. Before, after. Subtle edit in Photoshop, but definite improvement. And then if we do a full comparison compared to the original back in Lightroom, which I'll do in a second, that's where we're going to see the really big difference. The main difference being the color of this overall. It's just a very incorrect white balance from the original. And then we fixed some of that lighting because it was overhead and behind. So let's go ahead and reset that one. Oh yeah, it looks horrible. So see how just the bird's dark kind of recedes in there, and then we look at this one, that bird pops out, shows so much better. The greens are so much better. No pink log, no pink bird. There we go. Nice final image. Let's see how it compares. I think I went less cool with this one than I did the first one, but that's fine. This was shot a couple minutes later, and there's nothing wrong with kind of going different directions with it, right? That's the choice you get to make. Now, I could try and match them up and go cooler with this one, but I think each one sort of fits the image that it is here, especially with all this foreground green. It's kind of nice to have it a little bit more vivid than it would be in the dulled down green there. All right, so same perch, two different locations. I just moved around and shot this bird as it sat there. So two, I would say, kind of not completely different, but decently different shots, and I like both of them. All right, so on to the next one, which will be this guy right here. All right, so we have yet another Veery here. Just a couple things to do with this. I think this log or this trunk over here is just a little dominant, so we'll crop some of that out. Foreground's a little bright. Bird's just a tad dark. And then that's about it. You know, maybe we'll dim down this big rock. I do like the rock there, but it's a little bright. So let's get started with a crop. We'll just come in off that left side there. I think in this circumstance, that green patch up there isn't helping anything either. So let's just drop down off of that, and we'll get rid of those two bright white spots on that corner so they're not creeping in right on the edge. So that feels like a good crop. The main trees in the background look pretty level, so I think we're good there. All right, white balance fix. So just a little bit warmer, a little bit less magenta. Something like that looks pretty clean to me. Let's crank those shadows up, maybe even lift the exposure just a tad, drop the blacks for contrast. I'm then just going to put a big radial right around the bird here. Big soft radial, we're going to invert it, and then we're just going to darken everything, right? So we have a general soft vignette. Now what we don't want to do is go like that, right? It just looks absurd. It's visible. What we also don't want is we don't want the feather to be kind of like low here. Like, the lower you get, the more you see that edge, right? So we want to have the feather to the max. So it's a very nice soft transition, and you kind of go before, after, but you can't really tell, you know? All right, I'm going to add another linear gradient onto the bottom here to darken this up. There we go. And then let's just do one more radial on this big white rock here. It's actually not looking too bad, but something like that, and we'll just take it down a little bit on the exposure. And then lastly, we'll do an object select for this bird. I'm just doing object instead of subject because subject will probably grab some of the rock that he's perched on and all that. All right, we're just going to lighten that exposure up, lift those shadows up, drop the blacks for contrast, a little bit of saturation, and then we will subtract out the linear off the bottom so that it looks like the lighting is coming from overhead, which it is. This one, the lighting is coming from overhead and slightly behind and to the right, which is why the bird's lit up pretty well there. But it is still overhead lighting. You can see the top of the rock is lit more. Even in the original, you can kind of see the top of the bird is lit up more than the underside of him there. So what I don't want to do is just a full object select or subject select and then just lighten the whole thing up. By subtracting that linear off the bottom, it keeps that lighting looking natural and coming from overhead. All right, into Photoshop we go. I like the overall just warmer white balance of this. I think it works just fine. And the first thing I want to do is create a new blank layer and get rid of this big black smudge, this log or root or whatever the heck it is. All right, so new blank layer, clone stamp tool. We're just going to come in here and start sampling. Sample from the right, paint a little bit, sample from the right again, paint a little bit. I'm just going to use this moss line to kind of continue it, right? So we'll just move that along there, sample again. I want to resample a bunch of times and paint over the same area, so I kind of don't pattern it. So look, like there, that was like the same pattern as that. And then it kind of swoops up there. So watch, I'll use this section to kind of make it swoop up into there, you know, and then it seems like it works. So we'll just keep going with the rock here. Along the top there, we can kind of just fade that out. And I just keep resampling. I can even sample some from that side, maybe a little from underneath. I can leave some darker smudges here and there. I don't have to get rid of everything, right? Just leave some variation. That looks pretty good. And then we'll just go ahead and get rid of the rest of that dark area there. Bigger brush, lighter opacity. And again, make sure we don't have any weird patterns that are obvious and showing themselves. So there, that's that. I don't think there's really anything else I need to clone. So let's get started with some curves adjustment layers. I'm just going to darken everything a little bit more. And then we'll just paint that off of the bird. So we'll grab our paintbrush, paint with black. 100% opacity is fine on this one. I'm just going to get rid of all that darkening on the main parts of the bird here. Just like that. And then we'll zoom in. We'll just brighten up the head and the catch light just a little bit there. So another curves adjustment layer. Brighten that up a good bit. Just drop the blacks for maintaining that contrast. We're going to invert that mask, Command I. It's going to turn that mask from white, which was affecting everything, to black, which is affecting nothing. And then we grab the paintbrush, make sure white is our foreground, and then watch, we can hit that catch light, and then just a little bit bigger brush and a little bit lighter opacity on the rest of the head there. Everyone, I think we're done. You know what, that might be, yeah, it's a little bit too much on the light on the head there. So I'll just ditch that, paint with black. It just looked kind of too fake. And in fact, let me put a little bit of that on just the upper portion of the bird there. So it wasn't just the head that's so lit. So before, after, looks much better. We'll save that, close it, and let's compare that to the total before and after. I think it's going to be a nice result there. I really like this one. Just nice greens, mosses, great layering. And especially once we reset this and have that dull color, the wrong white balance. Look at the big difference, right? This one's just rich and vivid, has good contrast. This one just feels a little soft and washed out and too cool and magenta. And so when you fix the white balance, you don't need to add a bunch of saturation. That's one of the things I do see a lot of students doing, is on a photo that looks like this, they're like, it doesn't have much color. And their instinct is give it more color, right? Which makes sense. It's lacking color. I want more color. I saturate it or use vibrance. But the main culprit in most circumstances I find with wildlife photos is an incorrect white balance. And when you give it a correct white balance, all you have to do is give it a correct white balance. Watch, I'll reset this back to where it was. There, and all of a sudden you have so much better color. That's just in Lightroom from just a correct white balance. I didn't do anything. If we go back to the sliders here, I didn't touch saturation or anything, but look at the difference. Go from there to there, right? And then here's our final edit. That bird stands out quite nicely in the scene. Hey guys, really not sure about this one. This one's just going to be a quick rough edit, I think. We're not going to spend a lot of time. So the goal is to make this bird actually stand out nicely in this scene. I don't want to crop in too close, but I do need to crop out a lot of the busyness there. I was getting ready to start making some moves to try and fix it, and it just, he or she did not stay there very long. This oven bird kind of bounced out rather quickly. So I'm going to crop into the bottom, just use this out of focus branch as the base along the bottom. Then the branch it's on, the right trunk, will frame the right. In fact, let me show just a little bit more of that. And then we got this one kind of framing in over top. So let's go with, you know what, I'm going to leave the exposure about where it is, actually. Yeah, let's leave it where it is. Let's correct the white balance. So a little bit less magenta, a little bit warmer. That's good. Let's see what a shadow lift does. Yeah, that's actually pretty nice. And we'll drop the blacks for contrast. And then I think we're going to do, let's try, not smacking my lips into the microphone again. Sorry about that. Let's try the object select. We'll get the bird to stand out first. Again, I'm not doing subject select here because I don't want it to grab that whole branch that it's on, or most of that branch, and I do believe that's what it would do. So there we go. We're going to lighten this bird up nice. Lift those shadows up good. Drop those blacks. Give it a little shot of saturation there. That's looking good. I'm going to subtract that linear off the bottom just to, again, to help ground it into the scene, because the underside of that bird should be shaded a little bit more than the top half. That's much better already. I do think, however, we need like a general soft vignette around everything here. So we're going to create a new mask with a radial, big soft radial around the bird here. Invert it, drop the exposure just a little bit, not too much because we don't want it to be obvious. Then I'm going to do a linear gradient on this side, darken that right half, that trunk. And then I'm going to add, create a new radial, just big soft radial right in the background here, kind of like that. I just want to darken that whole area back there just because it's so bright, but I am going to subtract subject from that. It should take care of taking the ovenbird out of there for me. Yeah, it was barely hitting it, but just in case, right? And then we'll just darken that. And now, in fact, probably go ahead and enlarge that radial just a little bit, tip it down into that area, and we'll just drop that exposure a little bit, maybe even drop that saturation a little bit. That's looking much better. The bird's standing out so much more, right? Before, after, look at that. Big switch there. It was really dark there. Now it's lighter. Still fits in the scene though. No weird halos. Everything's looking good. So let's go into Photoshop. We'll just do a couple more little dodge and burn things here, and then we'll be done. Ideally, this background right here behind the bird, right in that area, would have been a little bit further away, but hey, you can't win them all, right? Or I would have shot this at 2.8 with my bigger lens instead of the 100 to 400. That would have helped soften it as well. The advantages of nicer gear, but it was much more convenient to have the 100 to 400 that day. Okay, so actually I'm going the wrong way. Here, we want to burn. So curves adjustment layer, we're going to darken it, invert it, Command I, turn that mask from white to black so it's affecting nothing. Regular paintbrush, paint with white, low opacity. I would do like a 10 to 15, maybe a 20 max. And then you're just going to go around and just hit some of these areas that are a little bit brighter and dodge it. See it now, it's starting to look a little too, the bird was like a little too fakey lit out of there. That's about the extent that I think I'm willing to go. We will do another curves adjustment layer, brighten it up a good bit. All I'm going to do is hit that crest there, brighten that up. Oops, we got to make sure we're painting with white so it actually affects it. That was too bright, so we'll back off. And then let's hit this catch light a bunch. Maybe even a little bit of that eye ring. Maybe even a little bit of that silly pink bill. There we go. I'm not going to spend much more time on this. This is not an award-winning photo, certainly not one of my favorites, but it does show this ovenbird off, and it shows it with nesting material, which is kind of a cool behavior, and not bad for how quick that grab shot was. If you remember from the shoot, I was just quite literally walking by, ovenbird popped up on that branch, I grabbed like 2 or 3 frames and then moved on from there. But if we compare that to the complete original, we'll see a much better improvement there. The bird certainly stands out more, I would say. Well, maybe stands out isn't the right word, but the bird's color and plumage shows much better here. I would actually argue that it almost stands out more as the near, like the darkish bird on the brighter background. But I think this is just more pleasing to the eye and shows off the bird a little bit better. So there we go. Done with that one. Let's move on to the last one. Last one? All right, everybody. The photo you have all been waiting for. No, probably not waiting for, but the reason I went out to actually photograph these birds, this was the target species, the Louisiana Waterthrush. And so I did get this one photo, but I got to say, I think it needs a little bit of work. This is one of those photos that would have benefited from my higher end lens, basically. You know, I shot this at 5.6, right? So the problem I have with this, the biggest problem I have with this, is that the background back here is just a little bit much in focus. If it was a little bit softer, I think it would just be cleaner up there. I am fine with all of this. This is all nice and is clean and works, but back here's a little bit busy. So I don't know why. I can't really explain it, but I have a personal rule for myself. I don't artificially blur anything. I don't like to just add a blur anywhere else. Again, like I talked about earlier, I like to do that in camera properly. But I have no problem like dodging and burning, basically like darkening all these bright spots, lightening some of these dark spots, and trying to just even it out back there. I'm still altering the background, so why am I okay with that but not blurring? I don't know, but that's just how it is for me. It's a weird decision. So anyway, let's get started with a crop on this. I I don't mind losing a little bit off the left. I'm trying to lose these dark rocks at the bottom. I just don't think they're adding anything, and this one either. They're not adding anything. They're just kind of pulling my eye away. So something like that feels pretty good. I don't love that one there, but I don't really want to come in any closer. And actually, I like some of the rapids over there, so I'm going to go with a heavy offset here on this. So I think something like that works to begin with. Now, the next decision is how much darker do we go with the water? Watch what happens if I darken the water there. I got to say, that actually looks kind of better overall, but I really want those like movement, the wash of the water there to really show. So I'm going to brighten the highlights. I'm basically just ignoring the bird at this point. Okay, I'm just adjusting everything else for the scene. So we go from there to there, but I don't like how those highlights brightened up everything else. So in fact, I'm going to darken the highlights globally. Okay, that actually helps back there, actually helps in here. Here's where I want my attention to be. I want, obviously, the bird. I'm going to make the bird stand out more, but this is where I want the secondary focus to be, because this is where all the cool action is right there. So now that we have this darker and a little bit less kind of rah in your face with the brightness there, let's do a radial gradient here, and we'll just hit that whole middle section that I was talking about. And now on that, we will punch up those highlights to get those areas just a little bit brighter. I think that's helpful. Although I got to say, I don't know that I like it on that rock. Yeah, I don't. So let's subtract with a linear off the left side there, and we'll just darken that. Okay, that's good. Now let's do an object select. Let's see if we can get this bird to actually show a little bit better in the scene. I will try and grab some of his legs there, and let's see what it did. It does look like it got them quite well. So we're going lighter here. All right, I was just making sure it wasn't haloing. Is it? See how it looks like there's like a halo there, but I think that was actually just natural. Yeah, it is. Look at that. See, there's just light area of water behind it. So I'm going to have to kind of fix that because it's going to look a little weird. Anyway, we brighten the bird, we lift those shadows a good bit, and we drop the blacks there to maintain that contrast. I am going to subtract with a brush. I'm going to go a little bit bigger brush, feather it up a bit, drop the flow, maybe a little bit smaller there. And then I'm just going to reduce some of it there, a little bit there, a little bit underneath here, some off the backside, especially the back underside there. Maybe a little bit right there is too bright. And then maybe a little under the, no, that one was okay, but right under the throat there like that. And I just don't want those feet to be like alarmingly standing out, you know? That's pretty good. Now I'm going to stay with the subtraction here. We'll go smaller size, feather 0, flow 100, zoom in just a little bit more because it did that weird thing across the back again with that selection. So watch, we're just kind of clean. Oops. Maybe let's feather it just a little bit because that edge was a little too firm there. So we're just going to clean this up along there so that speckled weird adjustment isn't really affecting the image as much. Also, it looks like the subject select missed some right there, so we're going to add a brush, and then we'll add it in right across the top there so the bird's head is back. Back to that subtract brush, which is there, and we'll subtract across the top here just to get rid of that weird, you can see it. Let me just zoom in a little bit more there. A little bit smaller brush. You can see that sort of speckled mess that's happening across the bird there. And there we go. That's looking pretty good. So let's zoom back out. Yeah, I'm happy with that. The bird's standing out nicely. Let's add one more mask. Linear gradient across the top here. And we will subtract the subject from that so it doesn't grab the bird over there. And then we're just going to drop the exposure, drop the highlights, and most importantly, drop those whites to sort of fade that background out. So there we go. A nice transitional change here. We go from that to that. Everything else gets kind of dark and the bird stands out a little bit more, but it does look like there's a fake halo there, and I don't like that. I know it's actually how the water was, but let's go into Photoshop. We'll fix it there, and we'll do a little bit more dodging and burning just to sort of kind of accent the water highlights where we want and de-emphasize the shiny wet rock where we don't want it. So first things first, let's clean up that halo. I'm going to try and decide how to do it here. I'm going to go new blank layer. I'm going to clone it. So we're going to go clone, sample over here, sample paint, and we're just going to paint some of that darker water in. In fact, you know what? I'm switching to just the paintbrush, soft brush, because look, those last couple things I cloned the rock up accidentally. So I'm going to sample that color right there, and then we're just going to sample there again and just paint that in along this edge and even under the legs there. I just don't want that to look like a halo, so we'll just kind of fade it in to the water there. That looks good. I'm going to hide that. We'll go back to the background here, select subject. Then we'll go back to this layer, turn the visibility on, select that layer. We're going to add a layer mask. It's going to be the wrong way, so then I'm going to invert that mask. So invert that mask, and now we have a rough selection started there. Back to our mask here, we'll grab our paintbrush, small brush. I'm going to stay with the soft edge brush. We're going to go paint with white so we can show it here. And lighter, well, you know, somewhat lighter opacity. And then we're just going to paint on those feathers to show them. That's looking good. The inside here has to get some of this, so we're just going to paint that in there. And I am painting with basically 100% opacity here along the legs there, and then a little bit across the back. Let's paint with black there to show that one feather. And there we go. And then let's complete with white out here just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I think we're good. So see how it gets rid of that weird halo? It just looked like a dodge halo, like I did something there to it. And now it's gone. Okay, so let's do some burning. Curves adjustment layer. We'll darken that down, mainly from the highlights there. We'll invert that so it's not affecting anything. Now maybe 30% opacity. Paintbrush, paint with white. Let's hit these lighter spots a couple times. There's a light streak there. Little one right there we'll paint. Some right there. This bright green can go a little bit darker. We don't want to hit the dark spots, right? We just want to darken the light spots. And this is just sort of minimizing out that foreground. I think a big soft brush across the bottom here is fine. Let's go back to our clone layer. I'm going to actually apply that mask. So if you right click on it or control click on the Mac and just choose apply layer mask, it gets rid of the mask and applies it where it is. So it leaves the cutout the way you had it. But then I'm going to go back down here, grab the clone stamp tool, make sure it's on all layers. Lower opacity, big soft brush. I'm going to sample up around there and then just softly paint some of that in just to get rid of that rock down that bottom corner. That's looking really good. Now back to this burn layer. I want to darken some of this rock. So we're going to paint some of that with the, oh, I still have the clone tool. Let's grab the paintbrush. That'll work better. So we're going to paint with white on this rock, kind of dim that down. Looking good. All right, now we want a curves adjustment layer we're going to use for a few things to lighten stuff up. So lighten it, anchor those blacks so it doesn't wash out. I'm going to start a little bit of that right on the bird's head there. Maybe a little bit underneath, not too much, but then some across the back there for that overhead lighting, right? That was too bright right there, so I switched to black and get rid of it. Back to white by pressing X on the keyboard, and we lighten that. Let's do the bill too. Some nice small brush right across that top edge, right across the pink there. That's looking good. A little bit bigger brush now, and now we're going to accentuate the flowing water where I'm seeing it and where I want to really see it, right? So I don't want to hit it like that and just overexpose it, right? But all these areas where there's a lot of fun motion to the water, we just kind of want to make those a little bit brighter and make them stand out. I think we are done. So check this out. We used 1, 2, 3 layers. Before, after. So watch the bird. I want you to just stare at the bird, okay? And keep your eye on the bird. Notice how much more distractions there are everywhere else, and then do that, okay? Like, it just makes the bird. Now just look, here, watch, I'll go even smaller. Just look at this image as an overall now. Before, after. See that? It just takes away those bright distractions around the edges. And I don't get it. It's weird. I'm fine with doing that. I guess it's because I'm not like completely altering the background by blurring it, but I don't know. I mean, I'm still altering it quite a bit, and I have no problem cloning stuff out sometimes. So it's weird. Just a weird, strange personal rule that I won't blur. But in any case, let's save this, close it. We'll compare it to the original. And I think you guys are going to see a really good difference here. We did a good amount of editing on this one to make this one stand out. It was undoubtedly a tough shot. If the bird was just a tad closer to me, I think it would have worked better with the more shallow depth of field. But There we go, our before and after. Huge difference there. Bird stands out way more, but we can see that water motion. I do like the water darker, though. The water's just kind of overpowering and too bright here in this original image. And there we go. There's our final image. So let's take a look at all of our finals. For 2 hours out in the forest, this is some great shot. I'm really happy with these. This is definitely by far the weakest shot. This one is probably next weakest, but it's pretty cool. It shows that motion, and I took a gamble with that, shooting it at, I think, a tenth of a second, right? Yep. Love this shot. Absolutely love. And then this is probably my favorite. I think this is my favorite of the set. I just really like how that image lays out. Shows out the forest. The bird stands out. It's a fun image. So thanks so much for joining me on this shoot. I hope you guys learned so much from this kind of stuff, especially with my approach and how I shoot this stuff in the forest. And I'll just end this by saying, and I know I've said it in some of the setup videos and probably out while I'm shooting, but the thing I want you to do and concentrate the most, that is the most helpful when you're out shooting, is to think and pay attention. Pay attention so much to that foreground and background and the placement of everything, especially when you get into these more habitat inclusive shots. It makes so much more difference. You can see every single time, look where I place that bird in the most distant clean background, time and time again, in between the logs, right in there with none of these dark things coming down in between him or into him. This bird, kind of busy background, but in just the right spot. Here, not the best, right? But still kind of works because it's cool behavior. All right, so there you go. There's my final set. I'll see you guys on the next shoot.